For this first session, what I want to do is I want to examine some more musical theory, and in particular, I want to look at the circle of fifths. Now, I bet some of you thought I'd forgotten all about this because I hadn't touched upon it when I was discussing scales and modes in Fundamental 2, and I didn't discuss it in the previous DVD either about chords and progressions, but as you can see, I haven't forgotten about it. I've just deliberately skirted around it, and that's because I've always found that introducing it when you first start speaking about scales and chords, it only serves to really complicate matters in my opinion. So what I wanted to do is leave it as late as possible in the series, basically until you'd had a good grasp of the basic theory and you'd had time to absorb all that information and play around with it a little before I started banging on about this magic circle, because, well, it makes the circle of fifths a hell of a lot easier to understand, I think, if you've had a good grounding in the theory of music first. Now, I've no doubt that most, if not all of you watching this have heard about this circle of fifths. You only have to start touching the subject of music theory and every man and his dog starts throwing the circle of fifths at you. But to be honest, it's not really surprising that they do, because the circle of fifths is an incredibly useful reference when you're writing music. It can help with identifying key signatures. It can tell you what notes comprise the scales. It'll show you the best keys to modulate to. It can help with transposing chords, and it can even help with chord progressions if you want it to. So it's obviously an important aspect of music, and because of that, I want to spend the next few sessions showing you just how it all works. Now, to understand the circle of fifths, what we need to do first is we need to look back at when we discuss key signatures. If you recall in Fundamental 2, we basically said there that when we want to write music, we begin with a scale, and the notes in the scale are determined by the first note you decide to start counting up from. Basically by that, I mean, if you start counting from C, then you know the key of your music is in C, and if you count from G, the key of music is in G, and so on and so forth. Basically, the key that you start from provides you with the key of your music. Now, that also means that whatever note you decide to build a scale on, it's going to determine the notes you have in that scale, and in turn that means how many sharps or flats are going to reside in that specific scale. For example, if we build a scale from, say, C major, we know it's a natural scale. It has no sharps or flats in it. So we know that C major consists of the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Now, if we build a scale from G major, now that has one sharp in the scale, an F sharp. So the notes in G major are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. Now if we move on from that and we build in D major, now that has two sharps in the scale. And basically they're D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. And if we move further on from that and build in A major, then, well, that has three sharps in the scale. And basically the notes in there are A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, and so on and so forth. If you're unsure of what I'm going on about there, I'd fully recommend rewatching the Fundamental 2 DVD to get a better grip on the basics of scales, key signatures and modes, because it's going to be important for this. Now, if you manage to follow along all that okay, then have a look at our list there, and you may see that there's something of a pattern emerging. If you look at that there, you can see that C has no sharps. It's a natural scale. But if you look at the next scale down, G, that has one sharp. And the scale underneath that, the D, has two sharps. And then the scale underneath that, the A, has three sharps. And if I would have continued earlier, we would have seen that E has four sharps, B has five sharps, and so on and so forth throughout our chromatic scale. Now, the important thing to note there is how each progressive scale has one more sharp than the one preceding it. But perhaps more importantly, that the order of those scales that I read out there aren't as random as they first appear. Now, to understand why that is, we first need to return to the previous DVD, the Fundamental 3 on harmony. Now, in that DVD, I hope I drilled it into your heads just how important the fifth note of the scale is. it's the dominant note. And as we learned, the cadenza is built around that fifth. The harmonic relationship between the tonic, the first note, and the dominant, the fifth note, is the strongest in music. And fifths are perhaps the most important note when it comes to music. De La Soul had it wrong. 3 isn't the magic number. When we're playing with music, it's 5. So with that in mind, look at the scale at the top of our list there, the C major. Now, what's the dominant note, the fifth note in C major? Well, it's a G. Now, if you look at our G scale, you'll notice that G has 1 sharp in it. Now, you'll also notice in that G scale there, what's the dominant note in that scale? The fifth note. Well, you can see there, it's a D. And funnily enough, our D scale happens to have 2 sharps in its scale. 1 more than G and 2 more than the C. Now, if you look at the D scale, what's the dominant note in the D scale? Well, you can see there, it's the A. And it just so happens that the A scale has 3 sharps in it. 1 more than the D, 2 more than the G, and 3 more than the C. Now, if I was to ask what the next note in the scale would be and how many sharps it would have, what would be your answer? If it was E major and 4 sharps, then you'd be right, because E is the dominant note of A, and it has 1 more sharp than A. Can you see that relationship? Basically, what we're saying there is, if you build a scale from the 5th note of your current scale, it'll have 1 more sharp in it than your current scale. Now, basically, what that means is that we can express that as a circle. So what we'll do is we'll call up a circle here. Now, I suspect looking at that, you now understand why this is called a circle of fifths. You can see there that each note along here is the 5th interval from the preceding scale. Now, C, as we know, has no sharps or flats in it, so it sits at 12 o'clock. It sits at the top of our scale there. Now, G, as you can see there, is sat 1 notch away from C. And because it's sat 1 notch away, it has 1 more sharp than C. Now, D, as you can see there, is sat 2 notches away from C, and that means that it has 2 more sharps than C. But since it's only 1 notch away from G, it has 1 more sharp than G. So, looking at that circle now, that should be pretty obvious that we can see how many sharps are in each key. If we come down here to B major, for example, there, that has 5 sharps in it because, well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notches away from C. Now, the only thing that's different here is when we reach here, 6 o'clock, 6 notches away from C. Now, there we have a G flat and an F sharp. Why? Well, to understand that, we need to revisit Fundamental 2, where we spoke about scales and enharmonic equivalence. We said there that we can't use a letter of the alphabet twice to describe notes in a scale. For example, in music theory, we can't write C and C sharp in the same scale because, well, basically we're writing C twice, and if we transcribe that onto a musical stave, it's going to create havoc for a musician reading it. Remember that musicians have to sight read quickly, and seeing a C followed by a C sharp or a C sharp anywhere in that stave, it's going to look like a C. It's going to be confusing. It looks like the same note. So, in order to avoid confusing musicians, we have to say that if we have a scale that consists of a C and a C sharp, for example, we'd write it as C and D flat. Now, by doing that, the C sharp and the D flat are still the same note. They're just known as enharmonic equivalents, and that means that it appears on a different line of the stave, and so it makes it easier to read for a musician. Now, when we look at our circle of fifths there and we reach this 6 o'clock mark, basically this is a note here that can be written enharmonically. We can either write that scale using the sharps, we can have it as an F sharp major, or we can write it as flats, as a G flat major. For example, if we wanted to write this as a sharp, we could write F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. Or, alternatively, we could write it in G flat, which would then be G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat, D flat, E flat, F. There's another reason that that's written like that, because It also signifies an important change in the circle, the transition from our sharps here into flats. Now, to understand why that is, we need to again return to our C major scale, and this time, rather than look at the 5th note of the scale, we need to turn our attention to the 4th note of that scale, the subdominant, and in this case, it's the F. Now, we know that if we build a second scale from the 5th note of our current scale, it'll have one more sharp. It's basically how our circle of fifths works there. Well, the same can be said for the 4th note of the scale, but this time, rather than counting clockwise, we count counterclockwise. So basically what we're saying is, if we take the 4th note of the C major scale, it gives us an F, as you can see there. The subdominant note is an F. Now, if we build a scale in F, rather than have a sharp, we have one flat. And the notes in F major are F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E. Now, if we look at that F major scale there, and we decide to build a scale from the 4th note of that F major scale, the B flat, well, the B flat has 2 flats in its scale. Basically, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A. And perhaps unsurprisingly, if we build a scale from the 4th note of the B flat scale, it's the E flat. And E flat has 3 flats in its scale. So basically what we can say is, if we build a scale from the 4th note of our current scale, it has one more flat than our current scale. So what we'll do is now we'll add these to our circle of fifths. So if we look at that now, our circle's now complete. Now, basically, if I said to you how many flats are in the A flat major scale, well, you could easily just count counterclockwise from C and say it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So obviously, A flat has 4 flats in its scale. How about B flat major? Well, 1, 2. So B flat major has 2 flats in its scale. Now, you may be wondering why here that it's called the circle of fifths when, well, basically there's also fourths in there. I mean, it's fifths if we go that way, but it's fourths if we go that way. And, well, I don't know, and basically nobody seems to know. Perhaps it's because counting counterclockwise is against our nature, so it's not worth saying a circle of fifths and fourths. All I know is that they call this the circle of fifths because generally we do count clockwise. Now, if you think about this, if you had this circle committed to memory, and I were to say write in the scale of, B major, you'd immediately know that, well, B major, there's 5 sharps in it because it sits 5 notches clockwise from C. So basically, you could turn around and you could tell me how many sharps are in the major scale, no matter what note you decide to start writing from. But the thing is, it's not perfect though, is it? Because you may know how many sharps or flats are in the scale now, but you can't tell me what those sharps or flats are. But if we had a way of figuring out the notes that were sharps or flats, we could not only say there's so many sharps, but we know what those sharps were. Then we'd no longer need a list of notes for each key or scale. We could work it out in our heads and just come across as a musical genius. So in the next session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can use this circle and how you can identify what notes are sharps and flats in your chosen scale.